Well, thank you all so much for coming. I want to introduce, obviously, Maeve D'Arcy, who you mostly know, I would assume, whose wonderful, wonderful paintings are activating my beautiful, beautiful space. And so I feel really pleased every day, really happy every day when I come to work and get to look at them. So I would also like to introduce Gail Levin, who is an extremely prominent art historian and writer who has written many books, biographies, a lot of women writers, Judy Chicago, and Elaine de Kooning, and is now working on a book.
Elaine de Kooning is somebody else.
Pardon?
Lee Krasner.
Oh, Lee Krasner.
Oh, she was shooting you, Kathy.
Lee Krasner. Oh, I'm so sorry. I got them confused.
They were roaming around.
I apologize. And Lynn, I'm sorry, I've lost my words because I'm old.
I'm just handed in a biography of a woman called Alice Baber, and I'm going to work on another one on Lynn Drexler, who's born the same year, 1928. And happily, Maeve is born a lot later, and she's here with us tonight. That, for me, is a real pleasure. I mean, I often deal with my artists dead, although I knew Lee Krasner, and I do know Judy Chicago is very much still alive. But I was telling Maeve that we need to tape this for her future biographer, because she'll tell us things tonight she won't tell the future biographer.
Which we can't wait to see. And thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. Ladies, take it away.
Yeah, also another thank you to everyone for coming out tonight. Can everyone hear me? Am I projecting enough? It's a busy art week in New York. There's a lot happening, so I really appreciate that you're here with us. Thank you to Kathy and the gallery for hosting us and making us feel so at home. And thank you so much, Gail, for being here. So I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about why your work is important to me and why I asked you to be in conversation today.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for coming. So you're known as, many of you might know Gail as the Edward Hopper scholar and expert, which is you can sort of like create that visual iconic world pretty easily, conjure it up. But the two books that affected me at really important pivotal moments in my life as an artist were the Judy Chicago biography. When I was in undergrad, I read that, and then I read the Lee Krasner biography when I was in graduate school in London. So those were two important artists, two important women, and two important moments in my life trying to navigate how to survive and make paintings. So, the Judy Chicago biography, I started telling you this when we were walking through the show, I read as an undergrad. Oh, and the other important reason that one of the reasons I admire you is that you are a CUNY person. City University of New York. For those of you who don't know, Gail is a distinguished professor and is at the CUNY Grad Center in Beirut, correct? So I went to Hunter was my home school, but I was actually at Hunter alums, there's a few, and CUNY alums. Exactly. It's such an important part of New York City, part of the discourse for artists and me. Yeah, it's all 5 boroughs. People are going through these amazing schools, and it's just really relevant now and important. So I was part of a program called the CUNY Baccalaureate for Unique and Interdisciplinary Studies. It's kind of a mouthful, but it's the CUNY BA program, and it's housed in the CUNY Grad Center. So basically, you put together your own major, and you can take classes at all of the schools in CUNY. But Hunter was my home school, and that's where I took all my studio art classes. So at weekends, we would be coming to Chelsea and going to see whatever shows were up. And that to be here now and have my work up just feels really nice and like full circle and special. So CUNY is, a very special part of my life and education, and so I'm just appreciative that you're there helping create conversations about art and art history.
I'm so sorry that you weren't earlier in one of my classes.
There you go. Well, I was reading your work, so it was I was channeling what you were doing. And there's a part in the Judy Chicago biography where Judy Chicago is telling students, I think she was like a visiting artist out of school, and she was telling students that like you have to go get a studio. You have to sort of take yourself seriously as an artist. And that summer, I rented a studio space in Long Island City from this guy who was going away to teach for the summer. And I had this beautiful big space that now probably costs 4 or 5 times what that was then. And I like literally had a huge view of the 59th Street Bridge, and I lay down on the floor, which is probably filthy, as it should be, and in an industrial building full of artists. And I was like, okay, I'm an artist, like I'm doing it. And that was channeling Judy Chicago through you, and that was a really pivotal, moment for me to take my work seriously and take my studio practice seriously. And I think you can argue that you don't need, there's different ways to have studios, and that's something that we, is and isn't interesting to talk about. But for me, it was also about channeling the importance of making space for your work.
There were stories, Maeve, of various women before the feminist art movement, and their studio was the dining room table or the kitchen table. And that's what Judy Chicago wanted to get you not to do.
Exactly. That's what she was to end. And I think you could argue now that if you could be a conceptual artist, you can be trying to piece together funds and money to survive in a city like New York, to have that big, beautiful, glamorous art studio, but to make sure that you are making the work and inviting people in. And that summer I had an open studio. I contacted everyone I knew to have studio visits. I really used it as a jumping off point for my practice and for, what this work is now is definitely relevant. And then the other book, when I was in graduate school, my mom sent me across the Atlantic, because I was in London. The shipping probably cost as much as the book. But for my birthday, the Lee Krasner biography. So and I actually just this morning reread the Amy Silman essay. I have to look it up so I don't butcher it. Abex and Disco Balls. Do you know that? In Defense of Abstract Expressionism. It's an amazing essay, and I love Amy Silman. She's one of my heroes. And she sort of talks about our sentimentality towards Abex, but also a lot of gender stuff, and why it's still, whether you like it or not, kind of in the discourse around art, contemporary art, or painting. But I love that essay. So the Lee Krasner biography, without being too sentimental, thinking about her, trekking around, making these big paintings, trying to kind of out-macho the macho men who were extra macho in that moment. Sort of tied into the same thing of you have to take yourself seriously, and you have to take your work seriously, and you have to create spaces and opportunities for people to talk to you about your work and see the work. So those were really, really influential biographies, and thank you so much for creating those. I guess sort of a question to start out.
Can I just interject one little thing there?
Absolutely, anything.
When I was out in California interviewing artists that knew Judy Chicago, including some of the male chauvinists who were showing at the Ferris Gallery, I had a very helpful boost from my driver, which was my husband who's here tonight. John Van Sickle, Professor,
Yay!
Greek and Latin. So I want to just take my hat off and thank him. But I also want to mention interviewing the late Billy L. Bingston, who, when I interviewed him, he told me, she took it, talking about Judy Chicago, she took it all from me. She took it all from me.
Wow.
I mean, Judy had a reason to be so feisty, and she was what the times called for.
And
I'm
also
glad it reached you.
in that biography, yeah, it talked about how everyone considered her like difficult to work with, right? And you're like, you know, reading it, knowing her work, knowing how iconic she is, knowing the dinner party, you're like, what do you, so? Like, so what? Okay, like.
That's what it took to make all that happen.
Of course, exactly. And so it's a good reminder to be difficult.
So I would just say one more thing.
Yeah.
Since I got introduced, you know, as the scholar of and writer and promoter of Edward Hopper, I just want to say that my first love is really abstraction. And my mother taught me to paint. She was an amateur. She had gone to art school and was forbidden to be an artist, but she taught me to paint as soon as I could walk. I had a bolo bouncer for a palette, and we would close our eyes and draw, and then fill in the shapes, and it was abstract art. And by the way, I grew up in a house with Kandinsky and Miro. They were all my mother's copies. She said they were her paintings, and it's not till I get to graduate school that I slipped there. It's not that till I get to college, excuse me, that I discover my mother was a copyist. And she did do her own work, but she was passing off these classic abstract artworks. So without coming from a wealthy family, I grew up with a wealth of imagery, of abstract imagery. So I'm delighted to see yours, and that they're not copies, and that they're very handcrafted and original. So it's a real pleasure to discover your work.
Thank you. Well, that was sort of one of my questions, was what was that like, or what sort of transferred you from like the Hopper world to like the ABEX world?
So Hopper was a detour. Realism was a detour.
Wow.
I mean,
a good one.
Yeah, but I come from a love of abstraction early on. And I think going to college in the 60s, it was pop art, there was a lot of figuration. So that was a detour. But I never had to reconcile with to accept abstraction.
It just was
part of my being.
Yeah. Well, that's something that I get asked a lot about the work, like where does this language come from? Where does like abstraction sort of start? And it's always in a similar way, like just always been my language, just always been the thing that makes sense to fill in a blank space. I think it started with work on paper, since, you know, making marks and navigating a piece of paper with a crayon or a pencil, and then, you know, got slightly more sophisticated materials moving forward.
How young were you when your teachers began to notice your focus on the visual and making art?
Well, my kindergarten teacher actually said that I would be an artist. And I think my mom was like, we'll see. We'll see what happens.
She's going to be an activist.
Yeah. But my kindergarten teacher actually. And I was really shy as a kid, so I think she realized that was also something that I was just like very driven and focused to do and exist in that world. And that's like a memory that I have, is sort of, you know, kid-sized table, paper, feeling very like comfortable with that language.
That's really very important, though, that early recognition.
Yeah.
And your mother didn't say, no, you can't be an artist.
No, she did not. She was supportive and still is very supportive. And, you know, even when I'm like, this is crazy, I should have something more realistic, but it's just always been.
I wouldn't say it's crazy. I think you've had so much recognition from all your artist residencies and showing at this major New York gallery.
No,
I would say...
That's the Irish in me. I can't accept anything.
Yes, I would say you've had good fortune and You worked hard for it, but it's still good fortune.
Yeah.
And you should feel very pleased.
Thank you. But when we were walking around earlier in the show and looking at the site-specific room, if you guys haven't been able to see that yet, take a look because I'm so happy with it, and it's not going to exist after Tuesday. But that's part of it, right? That's what makes it exciting and special. So I started talking about 6 of the paintings in the show were made at McDowell. There's some McDowell people here, thank you for coming. And really, you know, I think you can tell the difference between my relationship to color and sort of using possibly like the white of a paper or the white of the wall as really as like another element in the work, as a existing kind of member of the conversation. And I think in the wall, like I'm reacting to a history, right? Or like there's stuff going on a piece of paper or on a wall that I'm responding to. So I'm really, really excited about that room. So please spend some time with it if you can. And then we talked a little bit about like about language, and I've been writing about my work, you know, as much as I can in sketchbooks and journals. And
Before you leave McDowell, I wanted just to ask, since that's an artist colony with musicians and writers, was there anybody there that you think maybe had a small influence on what you were doing with your art, and could you talk about that a little?
Sure. I think all artist residencies that I've been to have had a huge impact on the way that I think about the work and the conversations that I have. And there's people here included, because the open studio that I did at McDowell, I felt like it was actually the best, my best explanation of my work, because it's hard to talk about it sometimes. You're like, okay, I made it, like I don't want to say anything else. But that, I think, because I was so charged by everyone that was there and the just like level of brilliant kind of people that were talking about their process. I think ultimately residencies are most exciting for me because of that discourse on the process, which obviously is a huge part of my literal work, but also to talk about, you know, what it means to make music or to write, to edit, to sort of have layers of time in making.
Essentially, you had a natural audience.
Oh, who were asking amazing questions and like, you know, really engaged. You know, it felt like such an honor to sort of have interest from people who were then scurrying off to their beautiful studios in the woods to make amazing work. So it was very, very special.
But then not even a year later, you went to Yaddo?
I actually went to Yaddo first.
Okay.
Yeah.
So were the experiences significantly different? And even
Like the vibe.
the vibes and the physical surroundings and the people?
Yeah, I think there's some people here who've been to both, so maybe you can share at some point in the Q&A. But yeah, I think the level of artists, composers, writers is quite similar, and some people go to both. You know, there was one writer who was there I think 10 or 11 times over many, many years. Yeah, I think another reason residencies have been crucial to my kind of survival as an artist is that they're usually outside of the city, right? So I'm born and raised New Yorker. I love New York or nowhere, but it's nice to leave, and it's nice to occasionally. And it's nice to be kind of embedded in the woods in like a beautiful space and walk through nature. So both of those have that. I think kind of the almost emotional part of those experiences is that, you know, a group of people who are looking through applications and a group of people who enable these places to continue to exist believe that you should be there. And believe that you should be there to do whatever you want, right? Like you can walk through the woods, you can watch reality TV. You don't have to make anything even. I mean, I usually am
But
very productive.
there's huge encouragement for you to make something.
There actually isn't, because there's no requirement at the end for you to like show what you did. And I think that again goes back to process. If your process is reading, writing, walking, even if it's not about producing, I think that could lead to like years of amazing work. But I think it's that permission and trust that whatever you do at that time will be fruitful and be important to you. And that's, it does feel emotional, because there's really not a lot of opportunities for artists to have that trust and to have that kind of free reign, and to have that, you're also treated, with such privilege and have all your meals made for you, and you don't have to go to a grocery store except to buy beer and wine for your open studio. So they've been very special places, and places that I've continued relationships and dialogues with people for years. So, yeah.
Does the shape or place of your studio interact with what comes out of it? I mean, can you work in a windowless studio, or are you so into? Could you talk about that?
I can work anywhere. It's nice to have a beautiful studio with amazing accommodations, but I've been kind of a bit of a, I don't know, nomadic in terms of studios over the years. Starting I guess at Hunter, having like group studios, right? I wasn't part of because I was part of the CUNY program, I wasn't part of the studio arts program, even though I took all the same classes. So it was just a big open studio space that you can go and paint in. But subletting that studio that summer was so crucial to my understanding of myself as an artist that I wanted to replicate that as much as possible. But I had a studio in a garage once, that didn't have heat or windows. And I've had a consistent attic studio for many, many years in the neighborhood that I grew up in Queens. And it's, kind of a funky space, but it's been my base. And then I'll go to residencies, and then I also had a studio. I kept that small space and had a bigger studio in Greenpoint for many years. So there's something nice about being in a building with other artists, even if you don't see them or talk to them, because most of us are trying to survive. So you're working a couple jobs and, not necessarily having that same pace or discourse that you get at residencies. But it's nice to know that there's all these people around you making, right? So it's been, and also studios are expensive. So sometimes it's nice to rent a big space and have it be almost a self-directed studio for a couple months and make big work, and then hopefully give it to the gallery or put it in storage.
Have you, having made this installation in the small room here, but it's only temporary, it's going to disappear, but
Right.
have you thought about, taking commissions to transform some kid's room, for example?
I mean, I don't know. I haven't thought about it. I don't think I would want to do that. But I mean, let me see. One of a gallery in Queens that I did, one of my favorite site-specific pieces. It's a really industrial space, and it's brick walls that's painted, and there's all these inconsistencies and kind of personality in the wall, and you're responding to it. I think I might seek out some of those spaces as for future shows, or proposals or grants. But yeah.
Can we talk about the way your art is so crafted, marked? I mean, it's just the opposite from just Jackson Pollock splashing his drips. It's definitely controlled and intentional, and it's related to writing, although you have lots of symbols. Almost it reminds me of the pictographs in the Southwest by the Native Americans, or I think your Irish roots. And can you talk about is it Odom, the Irish?
Ogham, yeah.
Ogham, the Irish language?
Yeah.
And Mark, tell us about how that's informed these works and when that began in your imagination.
I think it's been the last couple of years that language has been had an obvious relationship to the mark making language. So I'm kind of thinking about how like pattern, which is, I think, my relationship to pattern and mark making is about time, and it's about mimicking patterns in nature, but also mimicking patterns in like urban spaces, brick walls, sidewalks, grids, and then written language, which we know, what it looks like. Even if it's not a language that you speak, you can usually understand that it is language and text. And I think there's like a space in between those two places that I'm interested in. So the idea that you understand how much information is embedded in a mark, and how many variables there are, and sort of, that's sort of where the space that I'm in while I'm making and thinking.
But it's spontaneous, isn't it? I mean, you don't have it planned out.
No, there's no kind of...
And there's no grid.
There's no grid, but I'm always thinking about the grid, if that makes sense. I think I'm always responding to the grid or a lack of
But
it.
here, there's more like a pyramid, and you're almost defying the grid.
Well, yeah, but it's still there in my head and in my process, or in my relationship to a sort of blank canvas, or just a plane, like how to respond to that.
So, which abstract artists from all time are your heroes, or heroines, if I need to?
Right. Yeah, heroes would include all genders. This is funny because I was thinking about this, preparing for this talk, and thinking about undergrad a lot, and walking around Chelsea as an undergraduate student. And I had a professor who was making us write a lot about our work, which was great, but it felt very tedious at the time, because I was like, I'm trying to figure out my work. I don't want to be writing about it all the time, but it was of course helpful, and I still have those papers, because I had to print them out then, so I have them in a folder. And one of the questions he had like 10 questions that we sort of always had to go back to, and one of them was, what work are you really drawn to or attracted to, and how is it similar to your work, and how is it not? And that's always stuck with me, because there's been times where it's not actually painters that I'm the most excited about, or there was my brain, I have notes, I have actual notes. Right, the Gnaw piece, Janine Antoni, like when I first saw that piece, I was like, that's who I want to be as an artist. I want to create something kind of as monumental and exciting as that. And now I realize that, like, of course that was about like process and about making marks, even though it was not in painting. So I think about that a lot. Besides, I mean, I guess Martin is a big one. I guess maybe that would be. And I'm still trying to figure out how to channel the energy of artists like Lee Krasner, and sort of the epics moment without being too sentimental about it. Yeah.
Maybe in something like this, or another one, something abstract expressionist is kind of trying to creep in.
Yeah.
Maybe, it's definitely,
A little
yeah,
bit of gesture and drip there?
a little, yeah. And drawing is always the number one thing, and the line and the mark. So I think that's what happens when it's in conversation with the mark making. Were you gonna ask a question, Kathy?
Well, I'm looking at this particular painting
Sure.
right here, and the impetus for the big green thing
Mm-hmm.
with the bat.
Yeah.
And it's in dialogue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so,
It's in dialogue with the mark making.
Right.
So you always, but the things you put in dialogue
mm-hmm.
tend to be, I don't know where they come from.
Mm.
Do you?
They come from drawing, not literal drawings that are plans for painting, but the idea of the gesture of sort of wanting to fill in space, having that be like the main impulse. That's always sort of how I describe it in a very...
But is it an impulse in the studio? It's not planned. You don't sit around and think, oh, I'm gonna,
Do a green thing.
yeah.
No, it's in the moment, intuitive, but
It's very intuitive.
I'm drawing all the time, and I'm making marks all the time. So I sort of, in the McDowell talk, which I wish I had recorded because I feel like it was the best way that I have ever explained the work. I said something about like drawing, on an envelope, like while you're talking on the phone, on junk mail, which I still get a weird amount of, even though everything's supposed to be online. And there's something about that, right? There's
Doodling.
I mean, I call it drawing, but sure, yeah. It's the envelope has, a purpose, and it has like a structure, and you're responding to this sort of, the space already being broken up and navigated in terms of its purpose. And so then drawing on it is like in conversation with that. So when it comes to paintings, I think I sometimes want there to be an element that I'm responding to. So I think that's how I'm entering it.
With the black and white marks,
Mhm.
which are somewhat calligraphic,
Mm-hmm.
do you have any relationship to Japanese calligraphy or Chinese calligraphy or Arabic calligraphy?
I mean, not in a specific sense, but I think like we were talking about language in general, and kind of the evolution between like patterns and written language. So yes, definitely like an admiration for that. And Ogham is what we mentioned earlier, is this ancient Irish kind of origin language that's marks in stones, and they're actually like in situ in these rocks all over Ireland. So that's when I sort of realized that like that pattern was something that I was almost, drawing upon without realizing it. And that's been a really nice thing to kind of continue to research and look at.
What's the name of this painting?
This one is medium rare.
Because the X, which goes, well, there's an O, but it's a lot of X's.
A lot of X's,
And
yeah.
what do you think of when you think of the X? What does that mean to you? Is it just, marking down your vote from somebody that can't write? Or is it something more?
I mean, the X specifically, I feel like is infinite and endless. It's, and I think there's a little bit about this maybe in the press release, but for the show, but it's, X marks the spot, there's math, there's kind of amazing amounts of information depending on the context that can be drawn from it, right? It's good, I needed a break, I needed a moment.
Let's take questions from the gallery.
Yeah, exactly. Ask them if they have any questions.
Sorry about that.
No, you're fine.
I should have turned my phone off.
I mean, I didn't even make an announcement.
No.
Well, and I did want to, I don't know if you feel if you feel ready for that, but I did want to also like have a conversation with the audience if
yes.
people have questions
that's a
for
good
me
idea.
or you.
That'd be great.
Yeah, I don't know if anyone wants to start out.
Hi, thank you for coming. I'm thinking a lot about when I look at your work, it's very meditative, where you just look and follow the line, follow the interruption, and like kind of be moved through it in the process of looking.
Yeah.
I'm curious about the like tactile nature of creating mark after mark after mark. And like specific to your note about the X's versus O's, an X is 2 marks, and then an O is just a swift line. So when you are making those like those junctures where you change and you shift, is that coming from an aesthetic point where you're like, okay, I need to change now, I've been moving through this pattern, or is it actually more of a feel thing where you're like, actually this is something that I physically feel in my wrist, like I've been doing the same motion? I'm just curious about the tactile.
It's more of a feel thing. So it's also, it's about, right, like time is a very obvious thing in me. People ask me all the time, how long do they take to make? And that's something that I explored literally by like clocking in and clocking out in grad school, and then realized that the answer wasn't actually that important to me once I had an answer to give. But you can see that there's like labor involved, right? Because I'm kind of showing it to you in this obvious way. There's no tricks. It's just all there, like a drawing, right? There's no, it's sort of like all on the same plane. But what comes with like the analog nature of making the marks is that like there won't be any pigment left on my brush, right? So there's these like movements and like undulating patterns that happen that are about time in that feeling, and also like literally, like I'm literally navigating the space, and you know, like a typewriter or something, like there's something that you have to do to kind of slightly shift position and literally put more pigment on the brush. But what comes from that, I think, is the visual representation of time and labor and something else, you know, interesting that's happening. So then when there's another mark happening, there's some tension there, or there's some interesting stuff that can happen because it's shifting and moving as I'm moving around the canvas.
For me, in this digital age, it makes your works feel very handcrafted. And that's very appealing.
Yeah, and when we were just talking, I was saying I really loved learning how to write cursive. I found that really exciting as a kid, and I don't know if people are doing that anymore. I don't know, yeah. And I don't write properly cursive now, but handwriting and the process of making a mark is so important to me. So I'm curious what that will mean like now for us, because touching a screen is just different, right? So, but thank you, that was an amazing question.
Do you work 2 pieces at once, or a number of pieces at once in phases, or do you just do one and one?
So I commit. So I will often maybe start a couple, or be like gessoing a bunch of them. Maybe there'll be, I didn't really in this show, this series so much, but I really love these pigment sticks that are sort of like drawing or painting with lipstick almost, or oil paint with like medium in them. So sometimes I'll make like, you know, a quick gesture to like start, and then, but once I really have made a mark, I'll commit and I'll go for it. Yeah, and stick with it until there's no more. no more to do. Exactly. And that's like thinking about the grid, like we're talking about, you know, the structure of the painting, or a piece of paper, like those are the parameters, right? That's part of for me what could be infinite. So it's like it's almost like a snapshot or a cutout of a grid, or of like an infinite thing, right? But the end of the canvas is part of the thing that I'm responding to. So the site-specific work is really nice in that it's just like floating in this space in a different way. So I really love that both of those exist.
But I just have to mention, in this particular painting, you made your shape the canvas, I mean, the end.
Right.
Right, and so it didn't go to the whole end, you made you decided,
Oh, right.
you gave the shape
There is
the
yeah.
end, and the shape is totally filled.
Yeah, well, that's sort of, similar to that, like, okay, here's like a clicker
Right.
gesture, and then I'm responding to
And
it.
that's the only one that,
That has that, yeah. Well, then what happens is, right, if the impulse for me is to fill in space with this mark making language, what happens when I don't do that?
right,
Yeah.
so
Something happens. yeah.
fine.
Yes.
Do you make even the very small marks with brushes? Is it all brush?
It's all brush, yeah. Unless, like sometimes I'll use a palette knife or like those RNF pigment sticks. I don't know if you've ever used those. But the actual mark making is all with a brush. But it's, I go through cheap brushes really often. Because it goes back to drawing. Like I'm using it more like a pen almost. And the way that I'm holding it and how close I am. I work on the wall, like they're on the wall, so I'm literally standing very close to them and sort of navigating them in that way. But yeah, all brush.
Yeah. Being a New Yorker and going to school here and painting here, when you would go to the residencies upstate or the countryside or whatever, did you find it to be like a very different painting experience? Like, would you be differently inspired or?
I don't know like an exact way, but I think I'm sure, yes. I think also just the pace of residencies and the rural like combo, being able to like get into that space in the studio, which usually takes a long time, and then usually you have to jump back out to exist in the world and have a life. So when you're in there for so long, yeah, I do think you're picking up on what the McDowell studio was. It felt like a tree house, like it felt like they like cut out, a chunk of the forest. And I was looking at like a mountain, and I slept in the studio. I had a bedroom, but there's beds in all the studios, so if you want to stay in the studio, you can. And so I slept one night at the room, but then I was in the studio the rest of the time. I know, that's like a catchy tune. Water break. And are there any questions for Gail too? I mean, I'm happy to keep answering.
You said earlier you're Irish and you didn't allow yourself to think of yourself as an artist, but you didn't give yourself permission. I thought it was very fun. Can you tell me a bit about how your heritage informs your work? Because I see a lot of your heritage in your work, and I'd love to hear a wee bit about that.
Yeah. Well, we were talking sort of about how, what are your memories of as a kid of making art, and how important is that to what you're doing now? Which, yeah, it is, even if we can't even analyze it properly. But one of the things I loved doing as a kid was, which I now realize was a sort of artistic process or practice, was I know, it's a busy art world week, I understand. Was going through boxes of old photos, and still something that I love to do, and I still carry around like a throwaway camera in my tote bag, usually floating around there. But as a kid, it was important because it was almost a form of time travel. I was looking at, photos of people in my family before I was born, right? That's like a kind of trippy experience if you think about it. And I was looking at pictures of my family 3,000 miles away, and my cousins playing hurling, and knowing, because I would go back and forth since I was a baby, and then, for the rest of my life, almost every year, for a long time to visit my grandparents and my aunts and uncles and see like the, very rural spot where my father was born. And I think that seeing that in like pictures was an important way of me to sort of think about time, think about memory, think about place. And obviously it's a very, I guess going back to the nature of residencies, it's rural Tipperary is very different from New York City, so that I'm sure also sort of is part of my visual language. And then the Ogham stuff has been more recent, and I'm trying to find grant money and stuff to do more specific research about it and go and take photos and travel around. But yeah, it's always been a part of how I think and what I'm reading and what I'm listening to.
Did you pay any attention to Celtic manuscripts? They're so linear and
A little,
beautiful.
not in like a literal, not in an exact inspiration way, but definitely it was always in my and music, and yeah, and language and storytelling. And I think about when I talk about like all the information that's embedded into a mark, I also acknowledge that like, again, that space in between pattern and written language, I think there's so much room for, storytelling that isn't, for people who don't read or write, right, can be incredible storytellers, just like there's incredible musicians who don't read or write music. So I think there's something in all of that that's in the work, or in what I'm thinking about.
Is there some topic we haven't covered that you really want to talk about?
It's been just so nice to have like a really organic conversation about the work and to be able to talk to you about how your work has impacted me and then therefore this show. So yeah, it's been really special. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Yeah.
So are there any other questions from anybody?
Oh, one last question. Sure, one last question.
You have very fun titles for your work, and I know some maybe been pulled from conversations with us.
With you. Definitely, yeah.
Do you pick them just because you need something for them, or do they associate with specific works? Do you assign them after you finish?
A little of everything. I used to, I feel like very, very beginning not like titling the work. And then something clicked and I was like, oh, this is, I can do whatever I want. Like, I don't know.
You can say whatever you want.
You can say whatever you want.
It's your work.
It is my work. And I keep a list of titles, and sometimes there's things that from conversations, from things that I'm reading, from something that when I spent many years navigating, and like kids will scream out wonderful things at the playground, and you're like, oh, that's like so profound. So I write it down, and I still have that from like years ago. But so sometimes I assign them after, and sometimes I know while I'm working on them. But ultimately, I think they're like the title of a novel or a short story or a play or a movie or whatever. It's another entry point, right? So hopefully it's interesting and could be comical, could be not an exact entry point, but it's another point of conversation for the viewer to sort of get there. Yeah.
Can I say one?
Sure.
Thank you so much, guys.
This is for posterity.
Absolutely.
Because it's amazing to me that Maeve became a painter because she was a writer much before she was a painter, and I feel like I need to tell you that. And she did, really, we write, we produced, at Housing Works and on the radio, I don't remember what radio station.
Yeah.
And she was very shy and nervous, but she would bang out a poem.
Are you her mother?
No,
I'm as close without being. But, so when I see these, I'm trying to read them, in the corner.
They are very
It's
beautiful.
just,
Which is
I just wanted to say that's entertainment.
And one last thing.
Yeah.
Gail, what are the titles of your
Oh,
books?
Yes,
And what do you
we're
have
on a
coming
list.
up
So,
that we can hold?
let me just say I have a website. If you look, Google Gail Levin and CUNY, CUNY Commons, you'll get even a lot of free articles that I've written. But there's, like Becoming Judy Chicago, biography, Lee Krasner, biography, Edward Hopper, an intimate biography. Those are my 3 big biographies. And Alice Baber is going to have a different title, but I've
Do
just
we know when that?
And
when
the
we can
Lynn
hold
Drexler.
about a year from now.
A year, okay.
The Drexlers,
It's gonna be great.
yeah, twinkle in my eyes just happened. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.